Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. I'll start over here where the only warning is winter storm warning here for Taya Inlet, Klondike Highway on up to White Pass, and that's for tonight into tomorrow morning for heavy snow. 6 to 8 inches of snow could possibly fall or expected in the forecast for those areas again tonight and into early tomorrow. And the snowfall level will be about 2,000 feet. So it'll be the areas in that zone there that I mentioned above 2,000 feet or 2,000 feet and up. They'll experience the 6 to 8 inches of snow. Otherwise, kind of a winter weather or wind chill advisory out for the eastern Alaska range here. We got a winter weather advisory tonight and tomorrow for Bristol Bay, mostly later tonight, actually through tomorrow as well. And then kind of a mixture of winter weather advisories and wind chill advisories here for the Yukon Delta, lower mid-Yukon River Valley area, Seward Peninsula. Winter weather advisory out for the Bering Strait coast, St. Lawrence Island, snow-blowing snow, gusty winds 50 miles an hour tonight through tomorrow with wind chill advisories here, mostly on up from the Noatak Valley across the Kobuk-Koyukuk Valley, including Galena, into the Arctic Village area and Eastern Brooks Range, with some winter weather advisories thrown in as well for snow and blowing snow. But generally, you're looking at wind chills 35 to 50 degrees below zero, maybe even 55 degrees below zero. And that'll be in areas where you have 15 miles an hour or more of wind. So it'll be kind of quite varied and variable in these areas as far as how cold the wind chills get and whether there's any snow or blowing snow mixed in there. Otherwise, moving on to satellite imagery. Big storm here, low center coming up very close to Kodiak Island late this afternoon. The front pretty vividly shown right through here. That's bringing storm force winds into the North Gulf Coast today across the Barren Islands. And gusts to 55 miles an hour, so good gales into Kamishak Bay, and some snow along with that. Mostly snow. Seward may have gotten 7 inches or so, with maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 inches falling over the southern Kenai Peninsula, Port Graham, and Homer. Although all three of those areas have changed over to rain this afternoon. Port Graham sooner than Homer did. And Cordova just rained the entire day, about a third of an inch there. Also some pretty strong winds with this system. As I mentioned, 55 mile an hour wind gusts at Middleton Island, and the same thing over at Augustine Island. Portage Valley gusts 65 miles an hour. And in Turnagain Arm, McHugh Creek had gusts out of the east 73 miles per hour this afternoon. Otherwise, not a lot of moisture getting too far inland there. There is some, mostly, especially on the southern slopes of the Alaska Range, but nothing very heavy, just areas of some light snow on up to the north there. And then the cold air continues to pour southward here out of the Arctic and through the Chukchi through the pass there. Still 55 mile an hour wind gusts at Gamble out of the north there with some light snow. And that picks up more moisture, though, the farther south it gets over the Bering Sea, and kind of a steady snow there in the Pribilofs with north winds 30 to 40 miles an hour in gusts. Temperatures much colder there, down to about 9 degrees above zero this afternoon in St. George Island, and Cold Bay in the upper teens, lower 20s on Alaska. There were snow showers all the way out, and temperatures in the lower to mid 20s out to Shemya. And that's going to continue as that cold air just dives due southward, and we got warmer air coming up over the Gulf of Alaska and Northeast Pacific into the southern interior and the Panhandle. On the chart today, there's that 965 millibar low, very close to AKwx, southern Kodiak Island, Trinity Islands, Sitkinak, take your pick. and that occluded front storm force gradient in advance of that, and gales for sure, with less wind for the panhandle, and anywhere maybe 1/3 of an inch falling in some locations, maybe 1/2 an inch I think at Ketchikan during the day today, but generally 1 to 3/10 of an inch, that's about it with this weakening trough. And the areas of snow here, again, really hit and miss depending on what side of the terrain you're on. But down into Bristol Bay, and especially here with the offshore flow of the very cold air picking up moisture over the Bering Sea, and that all the way down to the Aleutians, and then some light snow flurries or light snow showers here through this area from the eastern Brooks Range. Pretty good conditions on the Arctic coast. For tonight, that front weakens and could bring some moderate amounts of rain into the coastal areas of the Panhandle tonight. And again, the winter storm warning for the Klondike Highway to White Pass, and rain and snow North Gulf Coast with lighter, much lighter as you head north, not much getting across the coast range, even in the Copper River Basin. Maybe southern slopes of the central Alaska Range might pick up a little light snow. Definitely along this trough axis in the interior there, kind of separating the milder air here to the east and the colder northerly winds back to the west there. So some areas of light snow along that. Not much change out over the Bering Sea. And then for Monday, we still have this now weakening low still in the vicinity or just north of Kodiak Island, just about in Kamishak Bay. And the trough through the central interior, snow showers, areas of light snow with that. And the front kind of hung up. Actually, another one forms and moves up. That's the original one that weakens as it moves into Canada. Gusty winds blowing snow here for the eastern Aleutians. And on Tuesday, strong storm possibly moving into southern Cook Inlet. Could be farther to the west, farther to the east. More likely it'd be farther to the west than it would be to the east. But anyway, going for this position right now. So again, west part of the state, cold, windy, snowy, and the eastern side, milder with wet conditions along the North Gulf Coast, to a lesser extent in the Panhandle. Lows tonight for the southeast coast, not too low at all, with upper 30s, lower 40s there. Milder here, south central Alaska, and still below zero north and west of the Alaska Range, all the way out into the Bering Sea, northern Bering Sea, below 0, 10, so not much change there for the Pribilofs, 20s for the Aleutians. Highs for the afternoon, mid-30s, above freezing now into south central Alaska, but below 0 to the north, followed by lows, upper 20s, southern Alaska, and milder in the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into the first flying weather graphic for Monday morning. Batch of IFR here, St. Lawrence Island, on down to west of the Pribilofs there in the Bering Sea. Otherwise, marginal for the Aleutians, marginal for the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit of IFR here, just west-southwest of Kuskokwim Bay. Then some VFR lingering along the southwest coast, especially the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, southern Seward Peninsula. And some more VFR there for, looks like the Noatak, maybe Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, Kivlena, IFR along the Brooks Range and part of the North Slope, and then down across the upper Yukon, Koyukuk Valley, and linking up here around Denali with the IFR slipping up here from the south and southeast in across Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, Manuska Valley, northern Cook Inlet, IFR across the Panhandle. And the afternoon forecast, not much change, still solid IFR, southeast coast, Gulf of Alaska, and now a little farther inland here, more extensive, all of south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, on up to the North Slope, and then some lesser, or still some IFR out here over the Bering Sea, but to a lesser extent, but just clipping St. Lawrence Island, well, just clipping the Pribilofs, a little more extensive over St. Lawrence Island, marginal for the Aleutians. Tuesday morning, IFR North Slope, much of the Arctic coast, on down the east side here, well actually into the central interior, to along the Alaska Range, Kodiak Island IFR. That extends across the southeast coast once again. And moving on to the afternoon, IFR, Gulf of Alaska, a little bit of improvement over the Panhandle, but still areas of IFR, especially along the coast and Lynn Canal Glacier Bay. Kodiak IFR Southeast Bering Sea, to the Pribilofs, back up towards St. Lawrence Island, but some VFR here over the western interior as well as the Bering Strait. And from the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, mostly IFR, but improving here over the Aleutians. Some VFR starting to show up there along the chain. And for passes, tomorrow, Anatuvik, Adigan, IFR about sums it up for both passes throughout much of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill be kind of a transition from lower conditions to better conditions. But so I average it out to about marginal VFR. And then for Rainy, transitioning from marginal VFR early on to VFR late in the morning through the afternoon, and the moisture coming back in probably won't hit Rainy Pass until the evening. Otherwise windy, marginal, Isabel, marginal, and Mentasta occasionally marginal. Tanita, start out IFR, maybe only marginal VFR, but definitely VFR throughout all afternoon, maybe noontime on, and Portage IFR to marginal VFR. Chilcoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels tomorrow morning looking like this at the surface south of the Aleutians here, and staying south of the Alaska Peninsula, cutting up along Kodiak Island, hugging the North Gulf Coast, on down the Panhandle, and a lot warmer air showing up here south of the Queen Charlotte's there, 8 to 10,000 feet, and 4,000 feet pushing up into the Gulf of Alaska. Icing areas of considerable moderate here in the orange shaded areas are inside the isolated moderate zones there. Eastern North Gulf Coast or North Gulf Coast Panhandle, to a lesser extent here for the Alaska Peninsula, and less significant icing, but still pretty good possibility of some light stuff up there over the north and out here in the central Bering Sea. Jet stream, cold trough right through here, kind of a northwest, cold air coming down into the Bering Sea, and then southerly southwest flow in Kodiak Island up the east side there, and a pretty good strong jet right into or just south of the Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, 20-25 knot winds from the southwest for the southeast coast. A little more southerly here, 25 to 30, maybe 35 knots, Kodiak Island, up into south central Alaska. And then some pretty brisk northeast winds there, 25 to 45 knots from the Chukchi Sea all the way down to the central Aleutians. And about the same pattern at 3,000 feet here, with the one low near the Queen, or near the Fox Islands there, another center up here over the central interior or west central interior, and southerlies here up to 30 knots, Kodiak Island, and lighter over the east side there, and the northeast 30 to 40 knots over the Bering Sea into the Aleutians, and 20 to 25 for the Panhandle. Turbulence, occasional moderate chop, northern Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, or southwest Kodiak Island, the Aleutians, say from, well, western Alaska Peninsula as well, and from St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait to the northwest coast.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide-open natural spaces undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity, activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed this segment. Today's sea ice analysis, still sea ice advancing southward and southwestward, expanding off the coast here. Probably going to slow up with the warmer conditions will be coming in, at least temporarily, into Bristol Bay. But still not much change here to the north, continue to advance and expand southward and southwestward. For the coastal water forecast there, for the north coast, south to southwest 20 to 30 knots, and the south coast, southwest 20 to 25 knots. Strongest winds, at least gust-wise, will be found over the inside waters from Stevens Passage to Lynn Canal, southeast, 25 gusts 40 knots there. Both those zones, and 5-foot seas, and sustained gale force southerlies for Clarence Strait, 35 knots with 9-foot seas. Tuesday, those come down considerably, down to 15 knots, 8-foot seas for Clarence Strait. South to southwest, 20 knots on the south coast, and south to southeast, 15 knots on the north coast. But those seas still up just under 20 feet. Stevens Passage winds will be southeast on the light side, 10 knots, and 15-knot winds now for Lynn Canal. Prince William Sound and the eastern North Gulf Coast, south winds tomorrow, 25 knots, seas 4 feet in the Sound, 17 feet in the ocean, and southwest 25 here for the western North Gulf Coast, 16-foot seas, south 25 the Barren Islands, west 20 Kamishak Bay. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet, south to southwest 25 to 30 knots with 6 to 8-foot seas. And then on Tuesday, Cook Inlet, north 10 to 20 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet, strongest wind south of the Forelands. Southeast 30 knots here for Kamishak Bay with 8-foot seas, and then south 30 knots, 13-foot seas for the Barren Islands, and south to southeast winds 25 knots for the North Gulf Coast, seas around 15 feet. Prince William Sound southeast 20, and the seas 4 feet. Kodiak Island, Pacific side of the islands there, Fognak, Kodiak Islands, Trinity Island, south 30 knots, also south winds 30 knots here, all the way down to Castle Cape, but Shelikof Strait northeast at 24-foot seas, north 20 for Bristol Bay, seas 4 feet. And small craft advisories, good stiff northerly wind at 30 knots on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula at 11-foot seas, but full gales, Pacific side from Cape Sarachev to Castle Cape, 40-knot northeast winds, 23-foot seas. For Tuesday, strong northwest winds across the peninsula, 40 to 45 knots, seas 19 to 23 feet. Big increase in the winds, Bristol Bay north, 40 knots, 10-foot seas. Gales here, Castle Cape to Sitkinak and up the east side of Kodiak Island from the south at 35 knots. Southeast 25 with 5-foot seas for Shelikof Strait. Fox Islands, north winds 35 to 40 knots. Strongest across Unalaska Island. It's a little stronger, not much difference really. Gales nonetheless, seas 17 to 22 feet. Full gales for the Central Aleutians out of the north, 40 knots sustained, 17 to 22-foot seas. 40-knot winds all the way over to about, say, Kiska, and then they drop down to 30 knots for Shimmy and Attu. Outlook for Tuesday, much lighter winds out west here, 15 knots over to about Kiska, then got a zone of 20 knot northwest winds, seas 12 feet there until you get to the Fox Island, or until central Aleutians, Adak and Atka, northwest at 30, 17 to 13 foot seas, and 40 knot winds front Alaska Island out of the northwest with 22 foot seas on the Bering Sea side, 30-35 knots from Nunavak Island. Southwest coast, north of Nunavak Island, gale warnings, north 35 knots, south of the island, north 30 knots, 7 foot seas. And we've got gales out of the north for the Pribilofs, 35 knots, 40 knot gale, St. Matthew Island and St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, north at 20. And pick that up to brisk wind advisory on Tuesday for Norton Sound, 25 knots out of the northwest, sustained 40 knot winds, gales continue from the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence Island, right on down the Yukon Delta coast, across Nunavak Island, where they increase and become northwest at 45 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. And gale force northerlies continue for the Pribilofs, 35 knots, 17 foot seas, north 35 for St. Matthew Island, 14 foot seas. Eastern Boulevard Sea coast, light northeast winds tomorrow, 15 knots, and even lighter on the central coast, just breeze at 10 knots out of the north, back up to 15 on the west side. Brisk wind advisories, Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort there, 25 knots, and then gales, Cape Thompson to the Bering Strait, north 35. That continues, not much change there on Tuesday, except the area from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, kick it up to 30 knots there, 20 knots on the west side from the north, and north 15 or north 10 to 15 for the central and eastern coast. And for tonight, we've got this storm force front coming into the Gulf of Alaska with the milder conditions, snow in the central interior, no change for the Bering Sea, and another big storm for southern Cook Inlet on Tuesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.